Hello and welcome to today's ICTUS International Music Competition interview. I'm your host, Alex. Today we're here in the beautiful Stone Mill at the Center for Advanced Musical Studies at Chosen Vale with the director and founder, Ed Carroll. Ed has had a long career as a trumpeter, conductor, teacher, and mentor. He's been praised by Sir Simon Rattle as a singer who happens to play trumpet. Ed, it's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Alex. But Simon was being very generous at that moment, but he's a nice man, so.
No, you have absolutely incredible recordings. I was listening to some on the way in today.
Thank you.
Really wonderful.
Well, the recordings were old things. You reach a point in your career that you could look back at it and say, who did that? Who was that person? But we're here at Chosen Vale, and this is a very important place for me. This particular course has been with us now for 13 years. It replaced the Lake Placid Institute, which ran for 8. So now we have 21 years of presenting this type of course, which means that we could drink legally at 21. I don't know what, but we have certain other advantages. 21 years old. It's great.
So what was the inspiration in founding this first Lake Placid and now Chosen Vale?
That's a good question. My hope is that we're making a contribution, that I feel that it's necessary for us to be contributing to our art, not just taking away a living from our art. So we decided to use my friends who are important musicians around the world and bring them together with hopefully what would be, the most interesting trumpet students in the world. And right from the beginning, the first year that we did this, we had reached our maximum and our target audience, and we've never looked back. And the number of pieces that have received their first performances here, the number of old pieces that have been re-examined. Last year at the seminar, I don't know where we are this year exactly until we finish, but last year at the seminar, the people on the course heard 73 different compositions.
Wow.
All the way from ancient music on natural trumpet and drums to music with electronics and the most interesting new complexity composers. It's everything in between, and it's a wonderful opportunity for all of us to spend time together looking at this rich repertoire.
Wonderful. And speaking of the new compositions and going back to the old ones, where do you see, I'm going to jump into the complicated question first, where do you see the future of classical music?
Of classical music, I have no idea. Of music is always changing. It always has. And so I think the sooner that we embrace change and stop looking back at how things have always been in the past, the more chance we have of succeeding as artists. Now, what does that mean to embrace change? I don't know yet, because that chapter is being written as we speak. But I will say this, that there have been more important trumpet concerti added to our repertoire since 1980 than violin, cello, and piano combined. The trumpet is a hot instrument right now. Maybe because of comfort with our jazz past and these amazing musicians that are on people's minds, certain colleagues that have elevated the art and commissioned important works, composed important works themselves. It's a great time to be a trumpeter. Now, what type of livelihood that will mean is hard to say, but I think that great musicians will always have a role in society, and as one opportunity dries up, another one emerges. We're a global economy now. I'm just back from a week in Beijing, and looking at the enormous popularity now of Western music in China, and concert halls that are being built left and right. And in 1978, that was never going to happen. And now that part of the world is becoming interested in Western music, just as we're becoming interested in their music, in Chinese traditional music, and embracing African drumming, embracing Javanese gamelan, all the different Balkan brass. And yeah, the music from the world is so rich, so it's influencing Western classical music tremendously. We're influencing these places, and the chips are on the table, and we'll see where they fall.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, I know every time I turn on the internet, there's just another trumpet player that I hear that's just incredible.
Yeah, there are marvelous trumpet players in the world right now, and there's some marvelous music being written. And I hope that through Chosen Vale, we're contributing to that. I could cite the different people that over the 21 years this course has been going have come through the course, but also the people that are joining us this summer for the first time. They're on the path now. We'll see where it takes them, and it might be very different than somebody from 21 years ago. You took Chosen Vale one time, didn't you?
Yes, I came in, I think, 2007 and 2010.
Okay.
And one of our judges, Mary, was, I think, in 2010 with me.
Okay.
And then Brandon, right now, or one of our judges now, was, I think, here the year before I came. I think he was like maybe 2006.
Right.
So,
exactly. There've been interesting people that have taken the course and that have gone on to have amazing careers. One of our participants from last year, in fact, I think he's been here for the last 4 years, just won one of the solo trumpet positions in Paris in Ensemble Intercontemporain last week, or 20 days ago.
Well, Lucas?
Yeah, Luca Lipari-Meyer. Yeah, I'm very, very pleased for him. It's a perfect situation for him.
And I know the conductors as well that have come through here.
That came through here as trumpeters. You're referring to Ryan Bancroft. Ryan was at Chosen Vale 2 or 3 years, and in fact, one of the signature moments of these seminars happened in this particular room, and it involved Ryan playing the Zimmermann Concerto for Håkan Hardenberger, and playing one passage just so incredibly well that the participants on the course interrupted the performance to applaud. And then Håkan said, well, since we've stopped, I think this passage should be played a little bit more like this. And he put his performance on top of that. And then Ryan said, oh, really? You mean one like this? And then he put one on top of Håkan. And the audience was rocking at this point. And then Håkan said, yeah, or maybe a little bit more like this. And then he put one on top of Ryan. And people were screaming. It was so exciting. It probably happened right there. I mean,
that's amazing.
Great moment.
Really?
And now he's gone on and just won the Malco competition in Denmark, which means conducting a variety of different orchestras all over the world in his first year, and major management and mentorship, and he is on his way. And yeah, he's come through Chosen Vale. And there have been many others.
I remember the first year I came, my eyes were just completely opened to a world of repertoire and technique and talent. I mean, this was back in 2007, so we did have YouTube and everything then, but not to the extent that we have it now. And so some of the pieces I'd never heard before, and I definitely went home and practiced.
Oh yeah, no, there are people on the course this summer that are hearing, I'd say half of them are hearing some music we're doing for the first time. Some members of our faculty are hearing some music for the first time because this is a dynamic process. You know, we almost have to redefine what contemporary music is. What are the dates of contemporary? When did the contemporary period start? I'm more and more defining contemporary music as music written in this calendar year. And everything else before it is older music, period music. And that's all right. It doesn't matter how we define things. And we're not here to be a new music course per se. We're here to investigate the extremes of the music that we play, extreme technique, extreme interpretation, and then also the philosophy of the music that we're doing and the philosophy of the music that we play in the community with our careers, what that means and what our roles as an artist, can be. Our obligation, if you will, to pass it along and to continue the art form.
That's amazing. I think that's really important, speaking about music composed in this calendar year, because I think a lot of times we look at these storied institutions like Chosen Vale now it's a big thing, and it's been with us for 21 years between Lake Placid and that, and you look at the New York Philharmonic or Beethoven and Brahms, and we're like, oh, it's been around forever. But at one point, Beethoven was new, the New York Philharmonic was new, Ichthus was new, Chosen Vale was new, and it's so important to.
Well, the big orchestras for many years curated music from the past. They're not doing that anymore. They're starting to become dynamic institutions. The Los Angeles Philharmonic celebrates its 100th anniversary this next season, and I don't remember what the entirely impressive number of commissions actually is, but it's huge. They're making a real commitment to the music of our time, and many other orchestras have too. And chamber music has always looked to contemporary composition. And so we're fortunate to have the music of Bach and the music of Mozart, Beethoven, throughout our history on into the Romantics, the composers that transitioned from the 19th to the 20th century, the important period then, the post-war composers, and there's such a rich history. These composers, the ones that have been, the compositions that have been vetted out, and the composers that wrote this music are some of the greatest thinkers of Western civilization, and they deserve to have their music examined and re-examined, in my opinion. But we never close the door on that, and there are new composers that are coming that have the same genius, and we're just discovering them. And fortunately, many of them are favoring the trumpet right now as a solo voice. We know that the role of the trumpet since the invention of the valve has expanded and expanded. The role that as a soloist inside the orchestra of Gustav Mahler and Richard Strauss, we know how the orchestra's role, the trumpet's role in the orchestra is expanded even in the latter half of the 20th century, and now we're coming up on the quarter pole soon of the 21st century. We can't look back at the 20th century and call anything from there new music. So, whatever. We do our best here to try to keep all these musics alive and keep them vital. And I'm enjoying my expanding career now. I'm doing a little bit of conducting, and the pleasure that I take in looking at the genius music of the past, and hopefully also be able to at some point conduct some contemporary composition as well, probably from my friends. The way we mostly find contemporary music are the music that we're finding more often is, written by our buddies. And so maybe there'll be some of that. But in the meantime, we have Maurice Ravel, we have Debussy, we have Richard Strauss, Shostakovich. There's so much joy and pleasure in studying these scores. And so I'm doing some of that.
That's amazing. Speaking of you taking on more conducting now, your career has had sort of several parts, right? Like as a performer and then teacher in Chosen Vale and now conducting. And so speaking of starting new things, it seems like you've chosen several paths. It's really interesting.
Well, I'm trying to lead a musical life and find places where I can contribute. There have been times in my life that I felt like I'm not making enough contribution doing what I'm doing now. And some of that is also circumstance. There's always the element of chance in one's career. But I'd like to think that my choices, the horses that I've changed from and to, have mostly been driven by where can I do my best work and where can I make the best contribution to art. I'm not a composer. Vincent Persichetti, one time, he was my theory teacher at Juilliard, and Persichetti said, after looking over one of my compositions, he said, "Mr. Carroll, as a composer, you're a tremendous trumpet player." So I haven't been able to make a contribution there, but through my teaching, I think I've made solid contributions. Chosen Vale, I've made some contribution. Maybe at some point we'll look back at conducting, the little bit of conducting that I do, as being something that I've been able to contribute to music with. And I think that that's ultimately our role in what we aspire to do, to make contributions.
Tracing even a little bit further back, how did you choose trumpet, or how did you decide?
It's such a weak need story that it doesn't need retelling. But I started the trumpet when I was very young, and I was 6 years old in Chicago, and I was very fortunate to have as my first trumpet teacher Reynold Schilke, the trumpet designer, manufacturer, who was a former Chicago Symphony member. So I got off to a good start and enjoyed playing the trumpet. I played in the local symphony orchestra and all village band and went to music festivals. Eventually was offered a chair at the Interlochen Arts Academy. I did my junior and senior years in high school at Interlochen. That was a joy because I was surrounded by such powerful musicians there. Peter Erskine, the jazz drummer, Bobby Mincer, the jazz tenor player, various people from that ended up in solo chairs in orchestras around the world. Tom Hulse, the actor that was Mozart, and these were my peers at Interlochen. And so I always believe if you have a talent, you rise or you fall to the level of the people surrounding you. And I was able to be surrounded, even in high school, with tremendous musicians. And then that led to a few years at Northwestern, studying with Chickowitz, and then through a bit of an accident at the Aspen Music Festival, where the director of the festival, who was also the dean at Juilliard, heard me play and offered me a scholarship to go to Juilliard. That led to New York, where I was surrounded again with magnificent musicians. Phil Smith was in my class at Juilliard. Manny Laureano was in my class at Juilliard. But Robin Williams was also in my class at Juilliard. He was just doing, theater, developing his characters and being as wild and crazy and genius as he was throughout his entire life. I've been fortunate. I was fortunate at a very young age to be in a very, very elevated musical environment. And I think that shaped my musicianship, certainly, my trumpet playing, probably. And then I joined the Houston Symphony for a season when I was 21. That was a good break. Played a little bit in San Diego, ended up moving to Europe and playing in the Rotterdam Philharmonic for a bit. And there we had all of the A-list conductors. We were playing for everyone that would stand in front of us. Was amazing. And that became my second musical education, paying attention on the stage to what was working, with one conductor and not working with another, although most of it worked, in a very, very fine orchestra. And yeah, I just paid attention. Maybe my career has been more reactive than proactive in that regard, that I like to sit over in the corner and pay attention to what's going on and then steal from it as much as I can. Just as I steal most of my teaching, and if I've had success as a teacher, it's probably due to having very good students in the first place, but also ideas that I've stolen unabashedly from my colleagues, both at Lake Placid and here at Chosenvale. We all go to each other's master classes, and whenever we hear some little turn of phrase or some way of identifying a technical or musical idea that resonates, that goes into the conscious and also the subconscious, and it comes out another time in my teaching. And so I guess I'm a student here as well, and that is a pleasure.
That's amazing. So you were saying that you're sort of like a lifelong learner, that you borrow from the atmosphere you're in. And as a trumpet teacher, maybe what are some of the, every student's, I guess, different, but what are some of like the recurring things maybe that you...
Well, I'll say this about teaching. I've never wanted to have a method to my teaching. Some other people have in the past, and it's worked for them. I would rather address each and every one of my students as an artist and as an individual that have individual needs. We know that there's no one size fits all, and I don't want to do my musical shopping at Penny's. I'd rather, find, a real tailor for each person. And so much of my teaching ends up being giving them permission to be themselves instead of telling them what I want them to be. I gravitate towards students who have more of an idea of what they like and what they don't like, and then try to help teach them by giving them maybe more craft to be able to achieve the type of music that they want, or lead them beyond the music that they've studied in the past. But I always allow my students to choose their own repertoire, which I feel is important, because I believe that they will always play the music that they choose better than any music that I choose for them. And then I want them to ask questions, and I want them to question my answers, because my art is different than your art, and I can't impose those values on yours. I wouldn't dare to. And yet at the same time, a young student needs a little bit of direction, and so I try to help with that. But then through the variety of things that I've done in my life, I hope that I could bring some sort of light to most questions, technical or musical. Yeah, so my teaching is that way, and then I try to remain a student. As I said, stealing from my colleagues here, when I teach at Cal Arts, I'm a lifelong student at Cal Arts. That's why I wanted to teach there, because we're teaching techniques that aren't codified in any fashion. There's no section in the Arbin book on split tones. There's no section in the Arbin book on, multiphonics and quarter tones and eighth tones and different tuning systems. And so I've had to learn all that as I go. And then the music is changing from one year to the next year. And the student body is changing from one year to the next year. And it's a vital musical place. And I so enjoy teaching there because I also enjoy studying there. I'm having new musical experiences there. And then when I'm teaching at the Bard Conservatory, in a more traditional place, I'm teaching students that are really, really smart, because to study at the Bard Conservatory, you're required to have a double degree. So the president of Bard, Leon Botstein, believes absolutely that a musical education is great, but it's not enough. One has to have more education during their college years than that. So they are required to take a 5-year course where they declare in the second or the third year, I'm not quite sure when they make their choice, a second major. And yeah, so we have students there that are doing degrees in trumpets and in economics, or, trumpet in science or whatever. And I think that that's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And the quality of the traditional training there is very strong. The orchestra is excellent. We have a postgraduate orchestra there called the Orchestra Now, which is super to be part of. And so I enjoy that environment also. I get to conduct there a little bit more, conduct music that I'm more familiar with. And so, yeah, I guess I'm a student there as well. Always grabbing ideas.
I really like this line that you said about giving the students permission to find their voice as an artist. That's something maybe just in life in general, I realized maybe in the past 2 years, and I'm just 33, but that nobody's going to give you permission to start a competition or start Chosen Vale or to compose a piece, or you have to give yourself your own guidance in life.
Yeah, Alex, we have to remember that most college students have been in school since kindergarten somewhere, preschool. And in most of that early training, they're being told what to do because they have no ability yet. They have no reference. They have no craft. They have no context. And so many of these undergraduate going on through graduate school students have never been out of school. And yet they're growing as human beings and they're becoming adults. And yeah, when I see them at that age, then much of what I do is give them permission to assert themselves. Be different than the person sitting next to you. Don't try to sound like anyone else. Never copy. We all have our own voices. We all have our own musics. We all have music that appeals to us, that gives us goosebumps, that we find curious and interesting, and then music that we don't care for. And let's assert ourselves on all of those levels so that we have more context, we have more background, because it means something to us. Håkan Hardenberger, in this room, actually he was probably standing right where I'm sitting right now, talking to the class a few years ago. Somebody asked the question, what do you program? How do you program a recital? Do you take into account your audience and who they are? And he said, God, no. How could I do that? How could I know who's in the audience? I don't know any of these people. I can't tell. Maybe there's one audience that's young and another one that's old, but that doesn't mean that I know what their tastes are. And then the person said, well, then do you choose something from every period? And he said, oh, that's the worst way to program that I've ever heard. And the student here sort of frantically said, well, then how do you program? And he said, I program music that I love. And I choose music that I love for my own personal reasons. And because I love that music, I will play it with more conviction, more clarity, more authority. And then hopefully the audience will recognize that and enjoy the performance because they enjoy hearing my work and my love for that music. And that was a wonderful moment here, again, of giving permission to follow your dreams and what you love and choose music that you love to play and then play it like you love it. And so I guess that becomes a large message at Chosen Vale. It becomes a large message in the places that I teach with my class, the people that I mentor. Mostly when they ask me what they should do next, I return the favor and say, what do you want to be doing? What do you dream of doing? How badly do you want it? It might not come quickly. It shouldn't come quickly. The greatest careers are the ones that the person has had to really earn that career through their hard work and then their perseverance, their patience. But it'll come if they love it and they work for it tirelessly. It'll come. And so, yeah, if there's a common denominator through any of this, it's that.
And I think, too, it's interesting to think about that, like doing what you love and trying to make a difference. Like you said, it may not come immediately, but also some composers during their lifetime, their music wasn't really accepted. And now we love it, hundreds of years later.
Yeah, I have a feeling that this is going to happen to Stockhausen's music. I think that Stockhausen is Beethoven. I think that he's a composer of that complexity and that importance. Music that isn't accepted by everyone in the creative music world now, isn't accepted by all of the people that are performing now, but it's accepted by some and it's inspiring to some. And I think that inspiration will grow. And I think that if I were to put money in Vegas on something happening in classical music, in Western classical music, I would put money that Stockhausen's music is going to be very important to my students' livelihoods and their music, and particularly to their students. So yeah, you never know. And music from our friends. I think that there's a very important reference that we should be helping our friends, and we will give special care to the music being written for us by our friends. And because it encourages them to write more, it encourages us to play their music and pull it in a little bit closer. And instead of worrying always on a global level of who the inspirational composers and the forms are going to be, doing it on a local level and who's around here that means a great deal to me. Play music written to you by your family, your brothers and your sisters. We have a participant who's been here for the last few years from Paris, an Argentinian that has grown up in Paris, and his father's a very fine composer, and he plays his father's music all the time. And so you know that every T is crossed and every I is dotted because he's presenting music from somebody that means a great deal to him. And I'm sure that his DNA is also showing in the music that his father writes to him, just as Marcus Stockhausen's DNA is all over the music of Karl Heinz. These close associations, I think, are also important. You know, we used to always say, think locally and then act globally. But I think there's a lot to be said in today's society for thinking locally and concentrating locally and staying with that. Playing the music of our friends. It's a good thing.
And shifting a little bit of gears now towards more competition, and you're going to be one of the judges. You've judged some major trumpet competitions,
right?
Like Porsche competition and several others. And what is it that you're listening for when you hear
music? Only for music. There's students that will always, they're participants, competitors, I guess that's the word. Terrible word, by the way, because we don't compete in music, but there'll be people that will be there and will dazzle us with their trumpet talent and their technique. But when you have a jury of real musicians like that, it's not interesting to them. They're listening for the person that is playing with the most clarity of vision, the most interesting musical voice, and the most commitment, the most authentic performance that way. Not the cleanest, although cleanliness is part of it, but not the cleanest. The person that speaks with the most authority. And particularly on the international level like this, it's interesting for people to come to be measured against your peers. I think it's more interesting for them to be putting together 8 different pieces and to be knowing that they're going to be judged with those 8 different pieces on a really high level. But to learn that much music, that if we have 80 people at Portia, it happens again this fall. When we open that, if we have 80 people, I think all of them are winners. The person that at the end is standing and gets the first prize, the second prize, the third prize, that's nice for them, sure it is. But the person that has learned 8 pieces that they're willing to, expose their musical values with, I think that's a win also. Tremendous win. So I happen to like that format, and I don't view it as a competition. I wish that they would call them musical happenings or something instead of competitions. Now, your competition is different because we're not seeing these people, face to face, and people aren't being asked to do 4 different rounds, and they're just simply presenting their own work, as I understand it, the best example of their own work. And the value in that I see is first introspective. What do I have in my repertoire? What do I have in the music that means something to me that I could offer to others to take a look at? So it asks you to define what your repertoire is in the first place. Just as we do with Chosen Vale, we don't tell anyone at Chosen Vale what to bring. I ask each person to nominate 5 pieces from their own repertoire, and then I go through each of them and try to make sure that we're not replicating anything. So, asking you to take a look at your own repertoire and then to present it as well as you possibly can. And we hear, whenever we're doing this with college pre-screening and festival pre-screening and things like this, you instantly know the person that threw this together because they were doing it 5 hours before the deadline. And then you can hear also the person that it means enough to that person for her to really give her best shot, which means maybe redoing it until it's at the very pinnacle of what they can offer at that moment, and then having the courage to hit send. I think that that's a great moment. But the person that throws something together, well, let's see how it does. There's no value for them in that. There's no value for the judges in that. But to hear people putting in hard work and then having the courage to send it, sure, that's something to look forward to.
And I think there was something I was talking, I think, with Brandon too about it's on a camera and we're not in person. And I think it's a hard skill to maybe learn how to connect with a camera and convey your performance to an audience. Or
yeah, maybe, or we could use the old, fourth wall, that there is no audience and we're simply living inside of the music. We're not playing to a camera, we're just presenting our music to the best of our ability. I'm not sure. I haven't thought enough about that. But I would hope that the finest amongst us that really, really want to have a career and to make a contribution in Western music are very meticulous in their preparation, but they're also meticulous in their planning, and they're meticulous in the way they run their lives. And they can be counted on multiple levels, and they're good people, and they do make ethical choices. And, you would like to say that, well, one has nothing to do with the other. I think that they're all interconnected. And so hopefully that competitor has given thought and, okay, the video has to be uploaded by this date, but their preparation starts this much time ahead. Their recording, their videos begin on this date, and they keep making them until they make one that's better than the last one. And then they delete the other one, and then they make more, and they keep doing it until they finally get to a point where they say, I can't do better than that. And then they hit send. And then there's value in that exercise, tremendous value in that exercise. But again, cautionary tale, no value in something that's just thrown together at the last minute.
And I'm not judging the competition, but I have seen the tapes, and you can tell instantly.
Of course you can. Of course you can.
What's been given a lot of thought and what's been. And
you have the same thing if you're on the jury, the panel in an orchestra audition. You know who's really there, prepared and ready to go. You hear it instantly. And the people that are just hoping for the best day of their life, which will never happen. And intonation is too fleeting for it to only appear on the best day of your life, So.
I like too what you were saying about recording it over and over again and perfecting it. And we did a competition at the school I used to work at, and Paul Arnold from the Philadelphia Orchestra was one of the judges. He's a violinist. And he said, as musicians, we spend a lot of time in the practice room practicing, but we don't spend a lot of time practicing performing. And that was really interesting to think about, like, whether it's making a tape or whether you're performing, like, to really get your meaning of the music across, you have to practice it over and over again.
Doesn't it seem logical, though, that we would practice performing?
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons that people get nervous when they perform is that it's a different condition. And they're in, it's not fear. I don't believe that people become, I don't like the term stage fright, because no one wants to like run off the stage because they're about to be, maimed. But instead, they're not familiar with that elevated sensitivity that you have whenever you're in front of an audience or in front of a camera or in front of anything. They're not familiar with that extra adrenaline jolt. And so then it knocks them off their center. The more times you could do this, and you could do it with a camera. There's no reason that, videotaping should be exactly the same as being in front of an audience, and treat your practice and make that part of your regiment so that, it's familiar when you're then in front of an audience. It's just more of this. That just seems logical to me and doesn't even need to be explained. But very few do it. And the ones that do it, that are meticulous enough to do it as part of their preparation, get ahead very quickly. Oops. Maybe if there is a magic bullet, it's not the mouthpiece you're playing. Right? And it's not this bit of trumpet gear or that bit of trumpet gear, but it's having a decent recording setup. And then taking the time to review the video or review the audio and make that part of your daily study. Yeah.
And I think it was also interesting, going back to what you said about choosing the piece for this competition that reflects you as an artist and what you have to say. And we just finished our first year, and we had applicants from 13 countries and 13 US states. And so much of the same repertoire came, and we removed the guidelines that you could play. You could play anything unaccompanied, you could play anything with organ if you wanted to, with a band, with an orchestra.
Right.
And it was just interesting to see that so much of the same stuff come through. There were a few people that did go out and played. Somebody played Krill, and another person, I forget the name of the piece they played, but it was something that I think I hadn't heard before, unaccompanied. And it was just interesting to see that.
Yeah, I think that when you're given permission to make your own program, let's say a recital program, what you choose to play is very interesting to me as an observer. Are they playing hard music? Or are they playing easy music? Are they playing music that somehow relates to each other in some fashion? Or is it just music from the playlist that everyone else plays? I like to, in my teaching and even in my evaluation of things, I like to go through a checklist. And in my checklist, there are 5 levels that we have to address when we're playing music. And I'll get back to this in just a moment. First of all, rhythm has to be correct. If it's close, it's wrong. If it's really close, it's wrong. The notes on the page, of course, have to be acknowledged, and you have to play them with ease. If you're playing the wrong notes, it's wrong. If you're struggling to play them, you're not there yet. Intonation. These are all objective levels. Intonation's like rhythm. It's right or it's wrong. If it's really close, it's wrong. You have to do these things correctly. Then, since the composer has often taken time to give us editorial remarks so that we know more than just in the melody and the harmony and the rhythm of what's in the composer's mind, we have to acknowledge all the editorial markings that the composer has left us. At that point, we reach the 5th level, which is interpretation. And interpretation is entirely subjective and really can't be questioned. I can't question, maybe I'll ask why you chose that particular way of doing this, and you'll tell me because it's your interpretation. And then I can have no more to say at that point. But you have to earn your way to get to interpretation by having these other 4 levels covered. Well, I think that there are a lot of people that are still wading through, they're early in their repertoire, they haven't really defined their repertoire yet, and so they're playing maybe pieces that don't demand very much rhythmically or don't demand very much, intonationally. It could be a well-tempered intonation instead of a modal intonation. Maybe it's music that doesn't have a great deal of expression as notated by the composer, and intonation they're still working on. So it's easier to get close to, the interpretive level quickly with that. You can't do that with the music of Barrio. You can't do that with the music of the new complexity composers. It takes, when Gabriele Cassone started playing the sequenza of Barrio, it took him an entire year to learn this piece. We've been talking on this course this week with this week's faculty, just how long it takes to learn some music. And Tom Hooten made the comment that one of his colleagues in the LA Philharmonic once said that I want it to take 3 or more hours, or I want it to take 3 minutes. Either this music has to be easily sight readable, and then I'll take a shot at it, or it's got to take at least 3 hours to assimilate it. I'll expand that and say 3 months or longer, like this, to really wrap your brain around it. Now, the great thing is when you've wrapped your brain in your technique and asked the questions that need to be asked and found the solutions to all these questions in a piece of very complex and very difficult music. The great news is only you and a handful of others have gone that route and taken that time. So you're already flying in rarefied air, and that's marvelous too. That there aren't 250 people at an audition that play this piece exactly the same way. There are only 2 or 3 of you in the world that have really been able to embrace this language. That is special to me. So I believe in playing really hard music. And, when you say that, well, there's music that's way too far for a student to grasp, okay, then maybe we should, for those students, dial it back a little bit. But as soon as possible, start showing them where the goals are and let them start working for those goals. Let the music show them technically what they need to do so that they can make a plan in building their technique that will service that musical need. Instead of the teacher saying, you have to be able to do this, 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 and this, here's a piece that's showing them that they need another third of range, or they're gonna have to figure out how to make a split tone, or whatever it's going to be. And then let that be the guide, let the music itself be the guide of what you have to do pedagogically. I think that's logical. I think it's absolutely organic this way. Instead of, again, one-size-fits-all techniques, and then hope for the best.
That's amazing. So we were talking about choosing your music as an artist and choosing your voice, but
Right.
sometimes when you're in an orchestra or some competitions and things, you have to choose certain pieces.
Yeah.
How do you try to make that music like your...
For me, I try to learn context.
Okay.
All right, if I'm given a French recital piece or a French concerto from, the 60s, Thomasy or Jolivet or Dessicot or one of these composers, all right, we know what the notes are and what the nationality and the language that it was written in, but we have to figure out the context and what's going on in Paris at that time and who are the composers listening to. As an example, you'll see in music of that period of these composers an indication for Sordine Robinson. And what in the world is a Sordine Robinson? But if you know the context and you know that these musicians were going to the clubs all the time and they were infatuated with American jazz, then you dig in a little bit deeper and know that there was an American trumpeter named Ray Robinson that was living in Paris at that point and was a very popular musician, and he always played with the cup mute. So Tomasi didn't know the name of the cup mute, what it was called, but he just said, Sordine Robinson, that thing that he plays, like that. But then you have to know that, then you know that he was in the clubs and listening. And so then a little of that language comes through. If you know that Messiaen's music was always written at the organ because he was a great improviser at the organ, as was Bruckner, you know, and you find a different context for the music that way. You can't listen, you can't create a Bruckner symphony without knowing that this is music that was composed exclusively at the organ, and that there aren't solo voices that can stick out on their own like this with expression, because the box is open and closed, so you could have expression with the entire section, but the first trumpet can't all of a sudden become cantabile molto with the others being, you know, in a choir behind them, because the organ doesn't work that way. So you start looking for the other clues. You know what's happening during, you know, Shostakovich's life. You know the other composers that worked in political extremes, you know, what those extremes were and how that affected their composition. Yeah, you're always looking for context. And then I think, armed with enough context and enough study about the composer, you could start understanding when the composer says cantabile, why? When you look at the Hindemith Trumpet Sonata of 1939 and realize that he had just been expelled, you know, from Germany because he had a Jewish wife. And he was the rector of the conservatory in Berlin, in such an important position, and sent away, then you can understand why the last movement of that sonata is Trauermusik, is funeral music, and why he quotes the Bach chorale, Alle Menschen müssen sterben, all men must die. He was not a happy camper at that moment. And he was in Switzerland, quickly came to Yale, lived the rest of his life teaching at Yale University. But he had to leave home. And he had to look back at his society and what was happening to it. And that colors his voice. Of course it does. You know, that somebody like Korngold had such success early on as an opera composer, and Die Tote Stadt had been performed 50 times by the time that he had to flee and went to Los Angeles, and went to Los Angeles as a copy boy. I mean, he was just doing whatever he could do with music until finally given the opportunity that ended up producing Seahawk and Robin Hood, and using leitmotif and using all the techniques of opera that comes directly from Wagner in his composition. Then that cast a different light on that film and what that music was supposed to be doing. And so there's always a backstory. They're not just notes on a page. So we try to learn as much as we can about the past, not necessarily to curate the past, but to take music forward so that it remains fresh in some ways. Otherwise, if we don't know anything about the music, why in the world are we playing it? What's going on with that? And yet we hear a lot of people that are playing music that, and it's a weak attempt. I hope all the people that take this competition and they submit music from their repertoire. They're choosing pieces that they love, and they know why they love it. And they know about the composer, and yeah, it has some reason to be. Then it's worth listening to. And then everyone that does that has won something by going through that process. And that's important. Then you're a winner. Just as I'm saying, when you go to an international competition, it's so hard to get into the R-Day competition, the Munich competition. They pre-screen, and then it's a hard program. But if you make it through the pre-screens and you're allowed to prepare that program, you're a winner. No one's going to blow that off. And the same thing, I hope that's the case with this competition. Fortunately, giving them the opportunity to do their own stuff, make their own choices, that has value.